Bonjour et bienvenue à Get Through French, where we collaborate with you for a successful language journey. Salut les élèves, je m'appelle Nikita Archer, you can call me Mademoiselle Archer, et je suis professeure de français langue étrangère au Guyana, en Amérique du Sud. This is our CSEC French edition, and aujourd'hui, nous allons regarder Paper 2. Paper 2 is the written exam. Remember, there are 3 papers for CSEC French. You have already completed your oral exam, which is Paper 3, and we have a video for that. Now we're going to take a look at Paper 2. On y va. As shown in the previous frame, the Paper 2 has 4 sections. Section 1 is the directed situations with 10 items A to J. Section 2, letter writing. Section 3, contextual dialogue. And Section 4, reading comprehension, which also has 10 items, questions A through J. Let's have a look at some tips and guidelines for the first section. Directed situations, les situations dirigées. On y va. Les situations dirigées. Voici quelques astuces. Here are some tips to help you successfully complete section 1 of paper 2. First of all, ensure that you read each situation carefully. Secondly, identify the language function. And next, your response is limited to 1 sentence. So that means you have to make use of your punctuation marks. Use them wisely. Only put a full stop or an exclamation mark once you have completed your answer for that particular item. And remember, there are 10 items in section 1, each worth 3 marks, making it a total of how much? 30 marks for section 1. So read each situation carefully. In addition, not every situation requires a complete sentence. For some, you may be able to use une expression comme it is your friend's birthday. Send him a quick email or leave him a note wishing him or her, a happy birthday. And you could simply say joyeux anniversaire, and that would suffice. All right, so keep these tips in mind. Now let's find out more about the language function that you need to identify for those situations. Language functions emphasize the communicative aspect or the practical aspect of language learning or foreign language education. And for your paper 2, which is essentially the written part of the exam, CSEC has decided to focus on developing students' ability to perform the following tasks, or communicate in the target language to do the following. Now, I wouldn't go through the entire list, so I would advise you to pause and take note of all the language functions CSEC expects students to be able to perform. And this year, what they've done is really isolated the functions because they are already in the modern language syllabus. 10 of these will be taken and will appear for your exam in section 1. So we need to know, we need to be able to do all, we need to be able to ask permission, borrow stuff, give explanations, express disappointments and other feelings, whether it's doubt or fear. We should be able to invite persons out, give instructions, and also give warnings, just to name a few. Alors, that is it pour la liste des fonctions. Just a quick reminder, this section is worth 30 points or 30 marks. Maintenant, on y va. Let's continue to section 2. Section 2 of paper 2, letter writing. Here's an expression, une expression idiomatique that you should pause right now and take note of. Passer comme une lettre à la poste. Passer comme une lettre à la poste. Que signifie? That simply means, or can be used, to refer to something you thought would be difficult, but it turns out to be quite easy. D'accord? Something you thought would be difficult, but it turns out to be quite easy. So easy that it passes into the letter box as easy or quickly as a letter. It just slips right in. Alors, let's get some astuces and guidelines for section 2 of paper 2. Letter writing, which is section 2 of paper 2, is one compulsory question worth 30 marks. Here's what students need to focus on. Before you begin, ensure you read your instructions carefully, all the information provided, which also includes the instructions. Next, we need to keep in mind that we do have a word limit. It's 130 to 150 words. And the other thing we need to look at is our structure, which has to do with coherence. There must be une ouverture, an opening that is appropriate, where we include the date, location, dear whomever or hi whomever, depending on what is required for you. And you will know what is required because it would be outlined in the instructions. They're going to give you a few points that you must develop in the different paragraphs. It's not always necessary to put one point in one paragraph, like you wouldn't put greetings alone, or greetings could be, hi, how are you doing? As for me, I'm fine, thank you. It could also include a thank you for your previous letter. And so we must ensure that we, while writing, are looking back at the instructions and that we're on track with the development of each point for the successful completion of this letter. Back to coherence. It's your structure. We have an ouverture, une fermeture, that is appropriate, a closing, saying our farewells, goodbyes, well wishes, etc. Must be appropriate. Next, vocabulary scope and of course grammar. CSEC has outlined, and I've already included that in a previous video. It's also on the website and our Get Through French Facebook page, what grammar you should have studied and more or less mastered in preparation for this exam. There are certain tenses, certain moods that CSEC expects the students to be able to use in their letter writing. So it's important for you to just show off in your letter writing and of course include idiomatic expressions. Anyhow, for this section, students, try to assign 25 to 30 minutes, keeping in mind the entire exam is 2 hours, 15 minutes, and you have some writing to do. So if we spend too much time on the letter writing, which is what happens sometimes or most of the time, and that's why you should be practicing right now. If you spend too much time, then you're going to lose out on having enough time for the other sections. Now let's take a look at the topic for this year and some more guidelines for letter writing. Letter writing topic for 2021. For this section, students will be required this year to write a letter on the topic, sharing with a friend your experience of a recent trip. Similar letters have been used in previous years, so if you've been preparing and practicing well, I'm certain you would have come across a letter with a similar topic. What should students be familiar with? As mentioned before, your letter should have an appropriate ouverture and fermeture, which really makes up the formule de politesse. So if you're wondering what formule de politesse is, it's the appropriate opening and closing, which includes your salutation, the greetings, and your farewells, etc. for an informal letter. So students ought to be practicing and be familiar with the expressions and vocabulary related to writing an informal letter en français. I cannot stress how important it is for students to identify the grammar needed. Now, if we look at the topic, it says sharing with a friend your experience of a recent trip. So it's not something that will happen, it's not something that is going to happen, but it has already taken place. What are the tenses that we can use? Definitely the past, right? Good. Now, vocabulary is also quite important. It needs to be appropriate, students. And having idiomatic expressions in your vocabulary arsenal. Again, I cannot stress how important this is because since the letter is marked holistically, meaning they're going to, after reading it once or, well, at least two times, they're going to look at the mark scheme and see how many points are allotted for content, how many for grammatical errors, how many for adhering to the word limit, etc., etc. And they're going to place you in a category. Now, having les expressions idiomatiques, using them not wildly, students, but at relevant points in your letter. So it must be something, it must be an expression that is actually going to improve your letter, not take away from it. But having them really puts you in the upper echelon in terms of the mark scheme. So since it's out of 30 marks, you have your grammar right, your vocabulary is right, you have included the formule de politesse that is appropriate for this letter. You are going to be placed in the higher echelon in terms of the mark scheme if you don't get a full 30. So ensure you take your time and go through these tips and continue to practice in preparation for your paper 2. Maintenant, section 3. Let's have a look at the contextual dialogue. Voici une autre expression idiomatique. Here's another idiomatic expression I thought it necessary to share with you. Une hirondelle ne fait pas le printemps. Une hirondelle ne fait pas le printemps. Ça veut dire quoi exactement? It means do not jump to conclusions. And for the contextual dialogue, you cannot jump to conclusions, students. You need to take your time to complete this dialogue. Littéralement, it means one sparrow or a sparrow doesn't make spring. So the sight of a sparrow is not a foolproof indicator that it is spring. And therefore, when you look at the dialogue, don't assume that what is said before, you can just give an answer and it's finished. Remember, if it's not the end of the dialogue, there is something coming after your response. And so you need to ensure that whatever response you give not only is appropriate for what was said previously, but it leads into what is said after. And so do not jump to conclusions. Une hirondelle ne fait pas le printemps. On y va. Let's find out what the tips are for this section. Les astuces pour le dialogue contextuel. There is only one dialogue you require to complete, and it is worth 20 points, 20 marks. Again, ensure you read the information carefully that has been provided. You must complete the dialogue, using the cues given in the instructions. So again, just like with the letter writing, you have to keep checking back, okay, what is the information they want me to include? What are the cues? Word limit is also given. You have a word limit of 80 to 100 words. Again, students, please pay attention to coherence, that is the structure. But since it's already a dialogue that has been formatted for you, I would say focus more on the vocabulary, scope, and grammar. Of course, include some idiomatic expressions, maybe one that is appropriate. And finally, for this section, I am going to recommend that you assign 20 to 25 minutes. Okay? On continue. Let's see what the topic is for le dialogue contextuel cette année. The topic for le dialogue contextuel this year is an interview promoting an upcoming activity. I've already mentioned to you in the astuces given previously some areas that we need to focus on. I said focus on your grammar, that is tenses, moods, etc., and your vocabulary. Ensure it is appropriate for the topic of the dialogue. We must also maintain a flow, all right? It must be coherent. Whatever responses you give, it must be coherent. It must match what was said before and flow into what comes afterwards. Again, I'm going to say use idiomatic expressions, so you should have some in your vocabulary arsenal. And finalement, please remember that your English is more advanced than your Français, and therefore all those fancy complex sentences you want to put, you need to break them down to the level of grammar and vocabulary you have for Français. D'accord? So that is all for this section, the contextual dialogue, section 3. Now let's move on to section 4, reading comprehension. Section 4, la compréhension écrite, reading comprehension. Je lis et je comprends. Let's get some tips on how to successfully complete this section. On y va! La compréhension écrite, section 4, the reading comprehension for paper 2. CSEC has, fortunately for us and the students, especially not just the teachers, shared the topic. The passage will be based on a teacher's experience on a visit to Paris, a visit to Paris. What do you need to keep in mind during your completion of this section? First of all, instructions, read them carefully. Next, read the questions, familiarize yourself with what you need to find out, and then you begin to read the passage. And the passage should be read at least 3 times. Okay, so read the passage first, read the questions first, read the passage, revisit the questions, see if you can begin making notes, even if you don't actually write your answers, have a scrap, read the passage again, and then really try to give your responses in English using complete sentences, students, and give your appropriate response. There will be 10 items in this section, and it is worth a total of 20 marks. So the question, it may vary. Now pay attention to those questions that are worth 3 points. Pay attention to if they ask you to identify or give 2 things or 3 things. If they ask for that, you need to give them that number. If they don't ask for that, but you see the question is still worth 2 to 3 points, it means there's a lot of information within that passage and you need to find it in order to earn those 2 to 3 points. Do not translate the passage. Ne traduisez Jamais. Do not ever translate the passage. Okay? This brings us to the end of paper 2. La grammaire française. In the news today, students have discovered that French grammar is not so simple. What do you have to say, sir? In preparation for the CSEC French exam, we need to know our tenses, moods, and voices. I've created content that is available on our various social media platforms, and so I'll share the links to those in the links in the section below, in the description box. For this particular video, I just would like to focus on what a tense is, what a mood is, and of course, what is the passive voice and why do we need to know it in French? So a tense really refers to when something happens, was it done? Think of it as a timeline. In the present, did it occur in the past, or is it going to occur or will occur in the future? While the mood now is really the attitude or reaction of the speaker towards the action or experience being described. And so we can have a mood with several tenses. So we can have the indicative mood, which really is used to state facts, whether it's present or past or something that will take place or is going to take place, right? To state, well, this is the situation. A mood, we can have the subjunctive mood. For CSEC, we need to know the present subjunctive, not the past, just the present. And finally, voices. The passive voice is usually when the focus shifts from the agent or doer of the action to what is the object. So let's use Jean a mangé la pomme. John ate the apple. That is active voice. In the passive version, it would be la pomme, a été mangée par Jean. So you see the difference there. What was once the object becomes the subject. So la pomme is feminine. Manger, which was the past participle, is now functioning as an adjective and therefore must agree with the new subject, which is feminine. So manger would need a second E added to it, and it would be spelled M-A-N-G-E, accent aigu, followed by a second E. And that's why it's so important to know the passive voice, just to remember that accord, that agreement that must take place. Alors, c'est tout, that is all. Pour vous donner un peu de motivation, voici un proverbe français. Just to give you a little motivation, here's a French proverb. It means practice makes perfect. And we know it's very important, especially for paper 2, that we practice, practice, practice. C'est en forgeant qu'on devient forgeron. C'est en forgeant qu'on devient forgeron. À bientôt. Merci. Thank you for joining us here on Get You French YouTube channel. Don't forget, we're also on other social media platforms such as Facebook and Instagram. We also have our website, and so I will leave the links for you to follow us and check out our website in the description box. Au revoir.